United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, again, thank you for having me. And tonight we're going to take a look at how deeply Islam has infiltrated our school systems and our universities and colleges across the country, even in Minnesota and in Wisconsin also, neighboring states. So this might make you mad, very angry, but it's what's happening. Dr. Benjamin Rush, who was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, is quoted as of saying, "The only foundation for a useful education in a republic is to be laid in religion. Without this, there can be no virtue. Without virtue, there can be no liberty, and liberty is the object and life of all republican governments. He alone who owns the youth gains the future." Who do you think said that?
Hitler?
Adolf Hitler. Yeah. Now these are some of the Islamic publications that are making it into our libraries, our schools.
Being used in our elementary schools, such as My First Ramadan and many others.
Okay, after September 11, 2001, the Saudis pledged $1 billion, not for the victims of the attacks, but to evangelize American college campuses and prisons in order to gain more terrorist converts to their radical brand of Wahhabi Islam. Unfortunately, in America's schools, our own teachers are becoming Islam's secret agents, either knowingly or unknowingly. This I think you've seen before, but I want to play it again because there's some important things I want you to try to latch onto.
Education is one of the most important areas that Muslims have to address. And while our objective, our final objective, is not just to become part of the system that we experience now and that we see, our objective, our final objective, is to create our own Islamic systems, and not only create Islamic systems for Muslims, but to look at all the other people who are sharing this country with us as potential Muslims. And if we look at them as potential Muslims and feel that we have the obligation, which Allah has told us, to try to bring them into the same style of thinking, into the same way of behaving, into the same objectives that we have, then we have to have some way that we can communicate with them and some way we can work with them. And in that long-range process of making America Muslim, all of America Muslim, then we have to have some actual short-range goals. We have to have some way of dealing with them and know how we're going to deal with them and in which ways, and be very calculated about it, or else we will not accomplish our goals.
Okay. So, did you pick out the phrase she said, they're sharing their country with us rather than we're sharing it with them? Okay.
Not so much.
But here's what she said, in case you didn't pick everything out. Says, we must have short-range goals. We must be calculated about it. Education is political, extremely political. We're not American, we're Muslim. I brought my children up to think of themselves first, last, and always as Muslims. I am not American, I am Muslim. Education is one of the most important areas Muslims have to address. Our final objective is create our own Islamic systems, not just for Muslims, but for all other Americans. Now here's the key. Wes, you talked about in Rochester they established a Muslim school there. Muslims around the country are finding it's a lot cheaper and easier if they just infiltrate our schools and use our schools to teach Islam to everybody else. She says, look at them, non-Muslim Americans, as potential Muslims. We have an obligation to convert them, making America Muslim, all Americans Muslim. This was back in August of 1989, so 30 years ago.
The school in Rochester is a charter school, isn't it?
Right.
So apparently,
Get our tax dollars.
it is a charter school with Minnesota public funds on the same per capita, per student basis as a public school.
Know of any Catholic schools or Christian schools that get that kind of funding? Okay, she goes on to say, we are in the process of developing Islamic education for our children, public schools, and school systems that span the country. We want non-Muslims to be signing up for them. Education is just one part of our agenda. We must be involved at every level, the local level, county, state, national, international level. How? As a distinct Islamic entity. So much for assimilation, right?
Yeah, right.
We will not be part of the great American melting pot. We do not want to melt into America. We want to go into American society with Islamic ideals and revamp their thinking. We want to turn them into Muslims. We should all be involved in developing Arabic language courses in the public schools, because one way of introducing non-Muslims to Islam is to have them come and learn Arabic language courses. Be interesting to know how many Arabic language courses there are in our primary schools. It's becoming more and more an option, at least, for students to take Arabic instead of Spanish and French and other typical languages. Now, here's the key point. The selling point of Islam is that the Arabic that they teach gets what they use to teach the Arabic, the Quran. The problem is that the Arabic in the Quran is not a speakable language. Nobody in Arabia speaks the Quranic Arabic. Never have. It was developed specifically for the Quran. That's the excuse they use, you know. The Muslim agenda in America cannot be any clearer, yet there are those in politics, education, and the church that bend over backwards to accommodate the Muslim plan for America and America's children. I want to show you this one video here, just a little bit. It's a field trip in a mosque in Colorado, and there's at least a couple hundred students that were there. All the girls were required to wear head coverings, of course. What's the sign say? It says, Colorado Quran campaign needs your help for dawah purpose only. The goal to have English translated Qurans available in every high school, college, university, MSA, which is Muslim Student Association, and every masjid, which is the mosque, and mashallah in Colorado. Mashallah means God willed it. We're going to go back and look at see what that means, but before we do, I want to play just one split second here, if I can find it. But what I wanted to show you is, right at this point, he's saying to the kids that Islam is God's religion. Okay, the word dawah, remember it said Colorado Quran campaign needs your help for dawah purpose only. The goal to have English translated Qurans available in every high school, college, university, and so forth. Dawah means to proselytize. That's why they want the Qurans. That's why they want them in English. Now, why do they want English translated Qurans in the mosque where they're only supposed to read Arabic? Because they want English-speaking converts coming in. So they're not trying to teach about Islam. They're trying to convert. They're using our constitutional freedoms to create their ummah, their Muslim community. Whereas we can't do that to create a Christian community or a Judeo-Christian community. That was banned back in the early 60s. But we're so afraid to implement the same restrictions on them that we're being run over. Islam is making inroads into the traditionally non-Muslim world and is beginning to run deep roots and vie with the laws and cultures of its hosts. Muslims are taking advantage of the freedom that democracies offer. This is the key point for abusing the host country. They use the same provisions of the law that are intended to protect and enhance liberty in order to subvert democracy and freedom. Currently, America is faced with a formidable enemy in a Trojan horse called Islam. Now, I went through this last time, explanatory memorandum, but I have to come back and highlight a couple of things so that what comes after will make some sense. In the explanatory memorandum, remember they talked about the enablement of Islam in North America, meaning establishing the effective and stable Islamic movement led by the Muslim Brotherhood. The key thing is that the objective is to present Islam as a viable civilizational alternative to Christianity or Judeo-Christian life or even constitutional life. That to them, Islam is the perfect way. Therefore, they have to supplant everything that we know dear and that this country was established on. A little bit later on, it talks about the civilization jihadist process, a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, so that it is eliminated and God's religion, meaning Allah, is made victorious over all other religions. Now, we constantly hear in the media, even from the church today, that jihad just means an introspection. You know, kind of going into your quiet zone and hearing from Allah, you know, and hearing the truth about your sin or whatever. That's not what they're talking about. That's not what they are ever talking about. The only way you hear that is in the media and from Muslims themselves, the Muslim leaders, and from our own Christian leaders, that, well, jihad is just nothing more than a prayer, a quiet time. No. Every Muslim, if they are indeed a Muslim, is required by Sharia, or Islamic law, to perform and to carry out the lesser jihad. Now that sounds like the lesser jihad, that can't be too much. No, it's the lesser jihad that is the violent militant jihad. Every Muslim is absolutely required, it's obligatory. If they do not carry it out when it's called for, guess what? They come alongside you as an infidel. And their head's on the chopping block too. It is a Muslim's destiny to perform jihad and work wherever he is and wherever he lands until the final hour comes. What is the final hour? That's when the call goes out from the mosque for the final jihad, or the grand jihad, which means basically the annihilation of everybody who's not Muslim. Now, I talked over in Wisconsin last week. I said the problem we face in America, and I've talked to many people, is that we think that America is untouchable. This can't possibly happen here. We're too strong, we're too smart, we're too this, we're too that, we're too faithful. Just look over in Europe. How long did it take? You know, there's not one European Union country that's not at risk of becoming Islamic within the next 50 years. Some within the next 20. Even Russia. In my first book, I was just looking at it yesterday, my first book that was published in 2009, I put in there that by 2015, the Russian military will be 50% Muslim. What year is this? 220? You know, so they're there. Now here's another key principle of the Muslim Brotherhood in the explanatory memorandum. It's a principle which says, take from people the best they have. Are they doing that? Taking the best of our laws, the best of our education, the best of our resources, the best of our leaders, their best specializations, experiences, arts, energies, and abilities. By people here, we mean those within or without the ranks of individuals and organizations. The policy of taking should be with what achieves the strategic goal and the settlement process. I'm sure most of you know who David Horowitz is, but in 2018, as founder and president of the Freedom Center, he put together a list of groups and organizations that are Islamic. He came up with a total of 217. That was 2 years ago, or almost 2 years ago. However, this list does not include all the Muslim Student Association groups on college campuses, of which there's an estimated 800 or more. It does not include all the care chapters around the country. There's about 28 of those, last count. Does not include all the mosques, which basically are just military planning zones. That's what they are. They're not worship centers. They never have been. General John Kelly, at the time he was Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security in 2017, he said, "The threat to our nation and our American way of life has not diminished. In fact, the threat has metastasized and decentralized, and the risk is as threatening today as it was September morning almost 16 years ago, 19 years ago now." In Maryland, there was a group of parents that were upset because the teacher was forcing the students to recite the Islamic prayer. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court refused to hear the case. Apparently it was okay with the Supremes if our kids are taught the Islamic prayer. Now, the thing I want to point out here, if your kids recite the Lord's Prayer, does that make them a Christian? No. But in Islam, you recite the Shahada, or the prayer of faith, you are a Muslim. So all these parents that have, and grandparents that have kids in school that are reciting the Shahada, they don't understand what they're doing here. It's basically pledging allegiance to the devil, is what it is. In Chatham, New Jersey, moms declared a holy war after school was teaching Islam as the true faith. This is in 7th grade. There's a little video out called The 5 Pillars that is being used for kids in 7th grade and under in New Jersey, but in other states as well. And in this little video, it's about 5 minutes long, it declares that there is no God except Allah and the Prophet Muhammad is his messenger. The cartoon video ends with a sad non-Muslim boy who suddenly smiles when the Muslim boy invites him to join him in the mosque for noonday prayers. Because now he can go pray to the real God. The degree and ease of which Islam has crept into Americans' primary schools and secondary schools has to do with ignorance and clueless staff, at least at the primary level. At the college level, there's no excuse, okay? These are learned people, they should know these things, but they're co-opting with the Muslims on this. Clueless administrators, and sometimes complicit administrators, school boards who refuse to review the books that are being used by students. They haven't got a clue what's in the books. Boards of trustees at the university level, state and federal education organizations, but mostly those are being ignored by the parents and communities themselves. If you are a parent or grandparent of kids in schools, you have a right to know what they're being taught. Your tax dollars are supporting that public school. You have a right to go in there and say, I would like to see the books that are being used in civics, history, social studies, geography, whatever it may be. It's creeping in everywhere. Yep.
How can we go to our public schools, our local schools, and ask, what are the right questions to ask to get to these answers?
Okay. First of all, it depends on your relationship with, if you know a member of the board of education, or the PTA or something like that, might be an initial avenue in. If you're not getting anywhere there, I see nothing wrong with going in and just meeting with the administration and say, are the books that are being used in the classes, are they in the library in the school? And if they are, go down to the library and pull them out, look at them. I have a partial list of American history books on the table out there that all favor Islam and denigrate Christianity. And they're mainline publishers. Houghton Mifflin and all the mainline publishers are doing it. So guess what? They're being edited by Muslims.
Yep. So it would work to take your primary school textbooks with favorable treatment to Islam.
Right.
It would work to take this to administration.
Sure, just ask them,
These
any of
books
these,
are in the schools.
I would maybe take the title off so they're not suspicious, but I would say, are any of these books being used in your school system?
Okay.
Now, keep in mind, this is just a partial list. I mean, if you go on the internet,
Sure.
Should we be able to go to the school board and request to see the textbooks as well as part of a
Yeah.
public school board meeting?
yeah, I mean, what's wrong with that? You're paying for the books, aren't you? With your tax dollars? Go ahead.
I called the Stewartville school and to get a hold of the curriculum coordinator, and I left a message for her to get back to me on this issue here. Never heard from her.
Yeah, well, I have no doubt that.
Then I called the second time, I actually talked to her, and she said they have resources online that they use, and she was going to email that to me. That was a week and a half ago. Haven't heard back from you.
Yeah.
Quite-
No, don't expect to get a lot of cooperation at most locations, but it needs to be done. We need to be aggressive.
As a general question, if you wanted a list of textbooks they might be using in this context, what would you ask for?
Well, like I said, the main categories where this is creeping in is in history books, civics books, geography, could be world religions. Most of the ones there are all either ancient history books or modern history. There is one book there called Arab World Studies, I think it is, or something like that, or Arab World Textbook. And that is just, I mean, that was basically written by Muslims, and so you can expect what it's going to be like. The problem that we have not bridged in this country is that we, or I should say we, but I mean the media, educational system, the churches by and large, accept whatever Muslims tell us about their faith. The problem is that 90% of it's not true. Never has been true. But we accept it as fact without cross-checking it. We've become very poor researchers. Okay? My background is research and analytical thinking, so anytime I hear something that doesn't jive with me, I'm going to nail it down and go back to the sources as far as I can. I don't know if I told you this last time, but I've developed a relationship with a woman that lived in Egypt, Sherry Burns, if you've ever heard of her. She has a Facebook page, but she wrote a book called An American Woman in Egypt During the Muslim Brotherhood Takeover. She's fluent in Arabic. She was hired by the Egyptian government to work in their history and museum, so forth, and categorizing everything. But she writes in her book, and she backs it up with resources and so forth, and what she says very clearly, and many other authors have said very clearly, non-Muslim authors, is that Islam is a totally contrived ideology. Muhammad never existed. The Quran was originally written in Aramaic, not Arabic, because a written language of Arabic did not exist. And so, I mean, and when you see all this, it makes sense, because when you read the Quran, it is so jumbled up and disoriented, and there's no context, there's no chronology, there's no continuity to it. Well, what happened was the Quran was actually authored by numerous people over a 200-year period, she says. And they just added bits and pieces in here and there in order to control the people that they were trying to dominate. And her book is available on Amazon. I highly recommend that you get it. It's a very interesting and easy read. Okay, Islam in America's schools is largely funded and implemented by the Arab kingdoms of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. They possess two of the most radical forms of Islam and are known Islamic terrorist supporters. Just one Qatar family, for example, Al Thani, has invested billions to spread radical Islam through movies. They own a good chunk of Miramax Studios in California, through K through 12 education materials, and by teacher training. They invest millions into a group called Primary Source. Primary Source is a teacher education organization, particularly on the East Coast. I don't know if it's out here. But what they do is they carry out summer camps for teachers to teach them all about Islam, so that they can go back into the school system and teach the kids. Of course, it's all erroneous. But
That's Wahhabi?
that's the source of Qatar, and Saudi Arabia is largely Wahhabi. The National Teacher Training Institute, created in 1989 as an outreach of the New York's 13 WNET public television, produced teacher training and lesson videos for America's public schools. It was called Access Islam, and offers 10 lessons plans for upper elementary and middle school students starting in grades 4 to 8. I believe they receive federal funding also. These are the 10 lessons plans. Religion and the First Amendment, the 5 pillars of Islam, Salat, or the prayer in Muslim life, Ramadan observance, the Quran, sacred scripture of Islam, the Hajj, or journey to Mecca, scholarship and learning in Islam, Islam in America, women in Islam, and art in the Muslim world. If you go on that website, I challenge you to find any corresponding teaching materials on Christianity or Judaism. We need to get beyond this, okay? While I agree with the sentiment, the problem is we're not doing anything. We're coming together, listening, being educated, talking to each other, complaining, and so forth. We need to get to the point where the interfaith movement is, which is organized, getting out there, getting in the face of people politely. I don't mean arrogantly or so forth, but we need to get organized and start standing up for the truth and start teaching others the truth, okay? And I have a little bit about that at the end. Why is there so much emphasis on Islam? Well, William Benetta, who's now deceased, he was a creator and president of the Textbook League. He made it his life's mission as a one-person reviewer of America's textbooks, okay? Because he knew there was something not right about what was going on. And he went through many textbooks and discovered that it was just infiltrated with positive images of Islam, all of which were erroneous and fabricated. In 2003, for example, he reviewed the Arab World Studies notebook and found out it was patently fraudulent, that the publication was a total hoax, and it was demonstrating its deceitfulness. It was published jointly by 2 Arab organizations, the Middle East Policy Council, and by AWAR, the Arab World and Islamic Resources and School Services Group. The Arab World Studies notebook, right in the very beginning, it discloses what its purpose is. Believing firmly that teachers are the vanguard of change in any society, AWARE has taken as its mandate to impact the very resources chosen and used by teachers, as well as the training and sensitizing of teachers themselves. So in other words, propagandizing, manipulating, and deceiving teachers into teaching a lie. The notebook is, according to William Benetta, the notebook is a vehicle of disseminating disinformation, including a multitude of fake, distorted, and utterly absurd claims that are presented as historical facts. There are 3 objectives in the World Studies book: inducing teachers to embrace Islamic religious beliefs, inducing teachers to embrace political views favored by the 2 groups, and impelling teachers to disseminate those religious beliefs and political views in the schools. Now, back in 2010, at least one state school board had a little common sense. The Texas school board, who a lot of states across the country rely on for information and textbook selection, They finally realized how much Islam was being infiltrated into their textbooks, so they finally passed a resolution basically banning a lot of the textbooks that were being used because they would mention Islam favorably about 4 times more than Christianity or Judaism, and the only thing that was mentioned about Christianity or Judaism was in a negative way or putting it down or making it look like it was inferior to Islam. For example, they showed that in one section of one book showed that there were 120 student text lines to Christian beliefs, but 248 to Islam, and so forth and so on. So they just were totally favoring and pushing Islam and coming against Christianity in the textbooks. In 2008, a guy by the name of Gilbert Sewell, he was writing a review of Islam in the classroom, what the textbooks tell us. This was a part of the American Textbook Council in New York. He said the deficiencies in Islam-related lessons are uniquely disturbing and incomplete and confected view of Islam that misrepresents its foundations and challenges to international security. These are some of the list of books. I won't go through these because, like I said, I have a paper list out there for you if you want to pick that up. And Pastor Dave, I only have maybe 4 or 5 copies left, so if you can make more copies if people want them, I'd appreciate it. American Textbook Council concluded none of this is accidental. Islamic organizations willing to provide misinformation are active in curriculum politics. These activists are eager to expunge any critical thought about Islam from textbook and all the public discourse. They are succeeding, assisted by partisan scholars and associations. It is alarming that so many individuals within the power to shape the curriculum are willfully blind or openly sympathetic to these efforts.
Who's the American Textbook Council?
It's an independent group that basically makes it their job to review textbooks across the country and just to see what's being written and what our kids are being taught. And specifically, they've taken upon their task is to look at the representation of Islam versus Christianity or Judaism. And like I said,
that's their mission, its mission?
That's one of their primary missions, yes. In 2015, Spring Hill, Tennessee Middle School, students were forced to write, "There is no God but Allah, Muhammad is his prophet," which is the Shahada, the Islamic prayer of faith. Christianity, like I said earlier, has long been purged from American public schools, but Islam is getting a free ride. In another school district that was caught promoting Islam, the school district in Washington State was promoting Islam through the Ramadan policy that provides special privileges for Muslim students. The policy directs teachers to create safe spaces for Muslims, plan with Muslim students to let them quietly slip away from class for prayer, privately offer information about nutrition during the Ramadan fast, give a lesson on Ramadan, and privately ask Muslim students what accommodations they want. I don't know about in Rochester, but over in Wilmer, every year the interfaith churches come together and they celebrate Ramadan with the Muslim community.
They do that in Rochester too.
Do they?
They post signs saying "Blessed Ramadan."
Yeah. Again, it shows complete ignorance and stupidity.
Can I tell you something else?
Because what does Ramadan celebrate?
The massacre of Jews and Christians.
Well, it actually commemorates the coming down of this false doctrine from God, Satan, to counteract Christianity and the true gospel. So all these so-called Christians are celebrating Ramadan and celebrating this false gospel from a satanic source. And they come against us for trying to speak the truth. The school district's so-called Ramadan accommodations run roughshod over the First Amendment and are a blatant insult to students of other faiths. according to Daniel Piedra, Freedom of Conscience Defense Fund's Executive Director. Ramadan policy has been recommended in Terror-Linked Council of American Islamic Relations. That's the other thing. CARE is strongly pushing changes in our school systems, and even in Minnesota, you know that we have a Muslim day at the Capitol every year, and basically every year CARE is pushing for three things: halal food in schools, that Islam's holidays are recognized in the public school system, and that guns are banned. The first two are very easily accomplished. Better not accomplish the last one, right? In Washington School District again, they want teachers to bless Muslim students in Arabic during Ramadan. Parents were outraged after the school gives students a worksheet writing Islamic faith declaration in West Virginia, of all places. I always thought West Virginia was pretty patriotic and hard-nosed miners and whatever, but in 2015, again in Tennessee, in the 7th grade, some social studies textbooks were discovered and supplemental materials used in the classrooms to contain pro-Islamic, anti-Judeo-Christian bias. There are an estimated 800 plus Muslim student association groups in America's colleges and universities, even on some Christian colleges. What is the MSA, Muslim Student Association? What is their purpose? Two purposes: to inform students about the glories of Islam and to recruit. And not just to recruit to be a Muslim convert, but to be a jihadist. If you go on to university campuses today, according to Sherry Behrens anyway, she says, who was educated in American universities but has also been on many of them, she said you will not find one book that is critical of Islam. You won't find any books such as mine on a campus anywhere, even on Christian campuses. But you will find books like this, okay? This is a professor down in Decorah, Iowa, at Luther College, Robert Schettinger. He wrote a book, Was Jesus a Muslim? Questioning Categories in the Study of Religion. To the question, he answered his own question in an interview, and he says, yes, even as a Christian, I have to say yes to that, meaning Jesus was a Muslim, and that Islam is a social justice movement, and that was what Jesus was all about. It must be a shocker to Jesus. He went on to say, an intriguing question, do Muslims understand Jesus in some ways more historically appropriate than Christians do? Jot down the other yellow here. It said, Schettinger offers a proposal for a more accurate and respectful understanding of faith than that he argues will improve possibilities for mutual understanding among Christians, Muslims, and others. He wrote another book, Jesus and Jihad, Reclaiming the Prophetic Heart of Christianity and Islam. I didn't know Islam had a prophetic heart, but anyway. He says, this is a Muslim reviewer that if you go on Amazon, this is the only review the book has. It says, a few words inspire more fear in Americans these days than jihad. When rightly understood, jihad turns out to be the perfect lens through which to understand the life and mission of Jesus. Jesus in Jihad argues that in the early Muslim sources, jihad stood for the struggle to transform a violent and unjust pre-Islamic society into one characterized by greater levels of justice and peace. Jesus emerges as a highly prophetic figure of resistance to injustices. Christians, through a renewed understanding of jihad, meet the prophetic Jesus from whom they have become estranged. Okay, there's another professor at the same college, Professor Todd Green. He wrote a book, Fear of Islam, an introduction to Islamophobia in the West. We're all nuts, according to him. He says, American and European societies, particularly in the long wake of the events of 9/11 and the bombings in Madrid and London, have struggled with the recurrent problem of Islamophobia, which continues to surface in waves of controversial legislative proposals, public anger over the construction of religious edifices, and outbreaks of violence. How much violence have you seen against Muslims in America? I haven't seen a lot. Yeah, are there some prejudices and things said that shouldn't be said, or things posted on Facebook? Sure.
There's some hate hoaxes too.
Oh yes,
Hate
absolutely.
hoaxes meant to make us feel bad.
Yes.
Do you happen to know the dates of those two books by the
The one previously was 2015. Jesus Was a Muslim, I think, was in 2009 or somewhere around there. This one here is fairly recent. I think this is around 2018.
So in the last 10 years?
Yeah. But watch what he says about himself here. Says the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine contributes to fuel to the aggressive debate in Western societies and creates the need for measured discussion about religion, fear, prejudice, otherness, and residual colonialist attitudes. That's us. We're colonialists. Okay. The fear of Islam speaks into this context, offering an introduction to the historical roots and contemporary forms of religious anxiety regarding Islam within the Western world. Here's the key. This book is born of my experience teaching college students about Islamophobia. I teach 2 courses in particular that allow me continually to cultivate my knowledge of Islamophobia and to explain this subject to an audience with little prior understanding. In other words, I get to indoctrinate them. This is why, and I don't want to oversell my book, but this is why every student who's going to college should read a book like that and be prepared. Because I don't care if they're going to a Christian college, and I'll show you some information from one of our prestigious Christian universities here in a minute. But they need to have the basic understandings of what they're going to be approaching. Because they're going to get indoctrinated, they're going to be approached, and in many cases by their own Christian professors. You'd be surprised at how many Muslims serve in Christian religion departments on our Christian universities and colleges. In some cases, they head up the Department of Religion. Georgetown University is one prime example. The Al-Falani Qatar Foundation and the Prince Alawid bin Talal. Who are these folks? Al-Falani, I mentioned, was part of the ruling family of Qatar. They practice radical Wahhabi Islam. They invest billions worldwide to advance their radical ideology and agenda. They pour millions into K through 12 American education. They fund primary source teacher training on Islam. They invested in Miramax Studios, I mentioned before, and they are a big supporter of ISIS and Hamas. Sounds compatible, right? Who is the Prince Alawid? He's a member of the royal family in Saudi Arabia, also practices Wahhabi form of Islam, funds the building of mosques in America, funds Islamic education in American schools and universities, established the Prince Alawid bin Talal Center for Muslim Christian Understanding at Georgetown University with $20 million. The goal to establish a bridge initiative and research Islamophobia. Go online. They got a whole website for it. And you'd be surprised at what the syllabus says. Anyway, why Islamophobia? This is out of their syllabus. These are the catchphrases that they use to put Islam in a favorable sight and those who were not favoring Islam in a bad light. Anti-Muslim racism. Again, didn't know Islam was a race, but that's what they're propagating. Capitalism, that's bad. Colonialism, bad. Countering violent extremism. Not talking about Islam, they're talking about us. Empire building. Gender violence. We're the ones that are committing gender violence. Homo nationalism. And then the last is Islamophobia, the Patriot Act, and a host of other words and phrases they use to denigrate us Americans. Why Islamophobia? There's a publication called Higher Education Today, which an article was authored by 2 college professors, and this is one of the opening paragraphs. It says, Muslim Americans and international Muslim students on campuses around the country experience blatant Islamophobia and microaggressions in many forms. Research shows microaggressions include stares in public, feelings of alienation, and assumptions of religious homogeneity. I'm thinking about when I was in school. If that was the case, I probably wouldn't have gone to school a day in my life, because somebody might stare at me, might have feelings. This is ridiculous. But that's what our college campuses are becoming, and our primary school campuses are becoming. Okay, there is a website. It shows up good enough on the bottom there, but it's studentaid.ed.gov. You go on there, and it's a huge website, and it documents all the contributions to all the universities and colleges and the sources of their money and what they were for. You go on there, and from 2011 to 2018, which is when I first put this together, Saudi Arabia alone contributed $354 million to 37 schools. Now, admittedly, a lot of the money being contributed is probably to pay tuition for Saudi Arabian students. But also on there it says gifts. They're making gifts to universities. Why? Because they want to control the narrative of what's being said on college campuses. So, University of Arkansas, I never thought that as a hot place of Muslim identity, but they got almost $50 million over a 4-year period. Johns Hopkins University got $64 million in a 6-year period. Georgetown University, $344 million, of which $333 million came from Qatar. I mean, I'm a Trump supporter, but one thing I have against him, he needs to open his eyes about Saudi Arabia. Why we are sending them military aid, and why, I mean, I know why, but it's not advisable, and why we send them other aid when they are building mosques in our country that preach radical Islam, and the takeover of America is counterproductive, to say the least. Okay, the other thing that Georgetown University has is what they call the Bridge Initiative. And the Bridge Initiative, again, is just another common ground approach to bringing Islam and Christianity together and common goals. Oh, by the way, going back to the Luther College books, one of the goals of Schettinger in writing his books is that he believes that Christians and Muslims need to come together because they both have the same social justice goals. Okay, Bethel University. Bethel University, they have a Middle East Studies program called Islamic Thought and Practice. It's in Amman, Jordan. Every year, a group of students from Bethel go there under Dr. Douglas Magnuson. Probably don't remember him, but he was one of the signers of the Common Word document, which basically admitted that Allah and God are the same. He's been leading up this program for 35 years in Amman, Jordan. I got a hold of the syllabus for the program, and I'll just highlight a couple of things. It says this course offers a survey and summary of the major beliefs and practices of Islam, highlights from Islamic history, and a look at current issues such as gender issues and modern Islamic movements. Given our living in an Arab-Muslim context, a strong emphasis is placed on understanding Islam in context and learning to relate to Muslims, developing the skills, understanding to enter into their world. Now, I have no problem with that at the moment, but that's not the total objective, okay? Developing a Christ-centered response and approach to Islam and Muslims. Since the beginning of Islam, Christian-Muslim relations have been characterized by mutual misunderstanding. That's a partial truth. Who was the first ones to engage in military jihad against all Christians? In North Africa, the Middle East, Southern Europe, Southeast Asia.
The Arabian.
Wasn't the Christians. The Christians have been living there for centuries without expanding militarily upon anybody. Students are asked to seek to explore an empathetic and Christ-centered approach to Muslims and Islam. Practice the love command of love our neighbor as ourselves. Where have we heard that before?
Interfaith dialogue.
Okay. Adapting behavior within that other context, suspending judgment, shifting perspective to see the world from other perspectives. Students will also be challenged to grapple with some of the current challenging Christian-Muslim interfaith issues. Specific objectives: historical development of Islam from a Muslim perspective, understanding Islam from a Muslim perspective, understanding some issues of contemporary Islam from a Muslim perspective, women in Islam from a Muslim perspective. See a trend here? Getting a one-sided view. Develop a Christian, Christ-centered approach in response to Islam and find points of common ground. Explore and reflect on the intersection and relationship between faith and culture and the boundaries and relationship between the divine of God and the human. Keep in mind, talking about Allah and Judeo-Christian God is one and the same. When you think negatively of some aspect of Islam, think negatively of yourself. Come up with something negative about your own experience. Look for barriers, areas of difference, challenges, etc., but also look for bridges, also areas of similarity and connection, common ground. Are Muslims and Christians talking about the same God? What do you think? What do you think the Bible has to say about this? What do you think of the Jordanian Muslim Common Word Initiative and various Christian responses like the one from the Yale Center of Faith and Culture? That's the Common Word document he's referring to. The Common Word document that was the Christian response to the Muslims that said, let us come together. And we remember that the Christian response was, they said in the name of God, the most merciful and compassionate, which is Allah. These are the presenters, the source of wisdom. They're all Muslim. They met local Muslims, went to a local mosque. They had this Dr. Safi and Imam Kaskas, translator of the Quran into English. This is the Quran that every student was required to use. This Dr. Kaskas is a personal friend of the Bethel instructor, and he made a contemporary Quran. Now, how accurate do you think that one is? Local speakers on Muslim-Christian relations and common ground were presented. They visited on participants in the interfaith peace movements. I know one student that came back from there, and I said, so what was your takeaway from your time over there? It was about a 3 or 4 month period. And he said, well, I learned that we Americans have a misunderstanding about Islam. That was the whole purpose of the course. I'll skip by this video because I want to go to another one here. This is what's happening in our schools.
Some of the things that I have to be conscious of. Since the attacks on September 11th, there has been a lot of scrutiny. We've heard stories and we've had friends who've been racially profiled, and I have been a punchline of a lot of terrorist jokes, and I'm very comfortable about telling I'm Muslim, telling that I've done things like memorizing the whole Quran. Feel free to ask anything you guys want.
Do you pray 5 times a day?
Yeah, I do, and I'd actually like to show you how it's done. So, when you start a prayer, you make the intention that you're going to pray towards Mecca. So we start off by saying, God is great. And we fold our hands, and then during this time we recite the first chapter of the Quran. And then we come down this is what we call the position of humility, and we say, praise be to God 3 times, come up, and then again, to end the prayer, you say, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to the angel on the right, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to the angel on the left.
Are you allowed to text girls that are not Muslim?
Well, yeah, I am exactly like you guys in many ways. You know, like I like hanging out with friends. I like, you know, trying out different kinds of foods. I like, you know, go on Facebook, but also, you know, study and work hard at the same time.
What kind of music do you like to listen to?
I love rap, and I write my own rap music.
Oh God, can you do something?
Putting me on the spot here? Okay, a couple verses, alright, just to show you guys. Alright, so my rapper name is Lil Q, by the way. So just to start off, alright? Lil Q in the building, y'all know that I'm crazy. My rapping's so clean, it'll make your mind hazy. Believe me, see me, that's cause I'm freaky. And everybody wants me cause I make it look so easy. People say I can't rap, that's only cause I'm Indian. But my raps are so raw cause I'm 1 in a billion.
I think it's important for students to find a voice and to be able to communicate with each other at different levels. So anytime Shaji can come into a school in front of a group of 50, you know, 7th graders and rap for them, I think that's a very powerful thing for them because it's not the picture that they normally see.
A question for you to think about right now is, how has this helped you approach Islam from a different aspect of thinking? How has it complicated your way of thinking?
It's sort of shown me that all these stereotypes that we always hear about on the news and stuff aren't true.
And Wasaji, he's like no other different guy in America. And well, I feel how he is because I came from another country too, so I feel the same.
Thanks, you're a good rapper.
One of the students, you know, he complimented me on my rapping, and maybe he had a different image in his head, you know, like the long shawl and the beard.
Thank you.
Nice. You really opened my eyes. But now when he thinks of Muslim, he's gonna think of someone who just kind of like, he's just like a normal American, and you know, Muslims just like us.
Okay, notice he's a high school student, but he's going around to elementary schools and junior highs. And he actually goes around the whole county, all the schools in the county, basically proselytizing. Now, I'm sure a lot of what he shares, he believes is the truth, because that's what he's taught. The school district sending around a Christian and a Jew in his path to say, share about Christianity or Judaism? Not going to happen. Why is Islam getting such preferential treatment? I mean, it's one thing just to share some things about Islam in comparison to other religions. It's another thing to keep emphasizing and pushing and pushing. The thing that the reds don't realize is once the greens take control, they're going to be like the rest of us. Here's my challenge to all of us. You know, I believe that as we become educated in this, I believe we are all called to be watchmen, to educate others. I felt that strong call in my life right after 2001 and the 9/11. I realized that so many people I knew didn't have a clue what was happening. And I just felt very strongly that, you know, God, if you want me to share what I know or what you're revealing to me, I need to do that. I need to be willing to take that risk. The bare minimum, we can all be prayer warriors, because this is a spiritual battle. We need to be breaking down the principalities and powers. And for example, you know, while some of us may desire and be willing to share the gospel with a Muslim, that may not be the first step. We may have to be in prayer for days, weeks, months to break down the barrier of resistance, but also be clear what God would have us do and who He would have us do it with. If you have no relationship with a Muslim, you can't just go up to a Muslim on the street and start preaching. I mean, it's not like the old days where you get a soapbox and take it down in the corner of 5th and Main or whatever, you know. But I do believe that every one of us if we take the time to gain some basic knowledge and understanding and really seek God about it, that we can have the opportunity to share the truth of the gospel with any Muslim. Now, whether that will lead them to Christ, you may just be a seed planter. You may be just breaking that barrier just a little bit, getting a little crack in there to get them to start thinking. And some of the ways that I feel are most effective, and I won't say that I have a lot of experience, but I know that when I've done this, it really causes them to think, is ask questions. For example, when Osama Dadak was over in Wilmer, I had the opportunity to talk to one Somali woman that was there, and she was looking through some of his stuff, and I said to her, do you read the Quran? And she said no, because she doesn't read Arabic. And I said, well, do you know that in the Quran, it says that Allah sends all believers to hell first? She said no. I said, yes, it's in there. Every Muslim believer goes to hell first, then they are judged by Allah. And then if they are found to be righteous enough, then they go on to paradise. If not, Muhammad didn't even know where he was going. He confessed that. Well, I put in my book, I said one of the first rules of following a leader is to follow one that knows where they're going. If your leader doesn't know where he's going, I wouldn't be following. Okay, get involved in your community. Find out what's going on in schools and politics in relation to this matter. Learn how to witness to Muslims. One of the things I present in my book is I don't know if you've heard of the 1 minute witness. Actually it's a guy out of the cities, I think, that put together this one idea of a 1 minute witness. And what it simply is that you just go up to anybody. You can do it to a complete stranger and just say, what is the best thing that's ever happened to you? And most people will respond and say, well, I got married, or my first son was born, or yeah, I got through college, or whatever, you know? And then you say, can I share with you what the best thing is that ever happened to me? Most people aren't going to say, no, I don't want to hear about it. But, you know, if they say, yeah, sure, you get a chance to say about how God came into your life through Jesus Christ, how it changed your life. And I know of people that have done that, and a complete stranger, the tears just start flowing. So I mean, there are ways, and we're each individuals, we each have strengths and weaknesses and desires and so forth. We just need to seek what God's avenue is for each one of us. But if we sit silent and don't do anything, and I don't care what our age is, our abilities, if we keep being silent, just sit around and complain, it's going to get worse and worse. Muslims are not going away. We can't ship them back to wherever. We can't go in and start preaching in their mosque, but we can reach individuals. A recent Pew Research poll showed that of the Americans that are converting to Islam, 77% of them come from Christian backgrounds. That ought to be an eye-wakener. Of the Muslims that are here in America, 35% are what I would call nominal Muslims. They don't pray 5 times a day. They don't go to mosque on Friday. They don't celebrate Ramadan. They're cultural Muslims. Even among the Somali.
Even what?
Even among the Somali, you'll find cultural Muslims. So, those are the ones that I believe are approachable. And once you get them to hear the message, then they can go back to their families, okay? Now, here's the sad truth of what happened to a situation. I don't remember if I shared this last time. When Shram was over our way, over a year ago now, I was at his event, and it was pretty good showing, a lot of people there. And I came back out after it was over to the entryway of the church, and I noticed there was a Somali woman standing there. I was kind of surprised to see a Somali woman there. And so I walked up to her and I introduced myself to her and asked her name, and make a long story short, you know, we had a nice little conversation. Turned out that she was brought there by a Christian man who happened to live nearby her. and invited her to come to the event. And anyway, I thanked her for her courage and coming to listen to Shram, because he was pretty forthright that night and so forth. And so she said, well, she was interested in finding out more about Christianity, but her family told her if she kept coming to things like this, they would take away her child. She had a little 2-year-old boy. And so she was really afraid about that. But anyway, turns out, make a long story short, she had been going around to a couple of different churches in Wilmer trying to find out about Christianity. Think she could find it out from anybody? Not even the pastors would talk to her. One church even had a pastor that was dedicated to reaching out to the Muslim community. She wouldn't even talk to her. Yeah. Even after repeated requests by the Christian man who called her up and said, look, this woman is interested in learning about our faith. Will you please talk to her? She never did. So after talking, she mentioned to me that she would like to speak with Shram, and Shram was busy at his book table, and I said, well, as soon as he's free, I'll introduce you to him, which I did. And so she spent quite a while talking with him. We eventually went into the pastor's office, and about 6 or 8 of us prayed with her. And we believe that she accepted Christ at that evening, but she was a little bit confused, wasn't understanding everything. And so one of the women that was there started discipling her, as did a couple other people. My wife and I spent one time with her, and then we kept in contact with her from on and off. But what happened was, she went online and got hooked up with some guy on Facebook. Turns out this guy claimed to be a former Christian pastor of 17 years and a missionary to Africa, to the Muslims. He converted to Islam because he came to realize that Christianity was a lie and Islam was the truth. So he shows up, a white guy, dyed his beard red, wearing all the Muslim garb and all this nonsense. Anyway, he came to another church where I was invited to come because they knew he was coming, so they wanted me to come and talk with him. But anyway, he showed up to church with the Somali woman. And so after church, I was very polite at the beginning. I asked him what his background was, how he got to where he is. Anyway, so we were talking after the church service, and I said to him at one point, after he was giving me all this nonsense, I said to him, you're a very brave man. He says, what do you mean? I said, well, you're an apostate in 2 different faiths. He said, what do you mean? He says, well, by being here in this church as a Muslim, you know that your head's on the line. And I said, and you've also rejected Christ to accept a false God. He says, well, he didn't have an answer to that. And so I said, finally, he said, well, I don't care if they come and kill me. If I die, I'll still go to be with Christ. I said, really? How do you figure that one out? So he was totally messed up. Make a long story short, she eventually left him, left the community, but before she left the community, she went to a ELCJ church, who the pastor had come to Shram's event at the same time that she came. She went to him for clarification about this religion called Christianity. What do you think she found out? The Lutheran pastor told her, well, we all worship the same God. So she came back to our Christian friend who was discipling her, and she says, why do I need to change them? Well, before we could, quote, reintroduce her, she left and went up to Green Bay. She's now in Indiana, married to an American Marine who converted to Islam. And they go to the most radical mosque in the United States, in Indianapolis. So we keep praying for her. So that's, I pity that pastor, that's all I can say, for turning somebody away from Christ for a false God. Okay, just real quick, I did get an endorsement from Dr. Ed Hinson on my book, the founding dean of divinity at Liberty University. Says your book is the finest and most thorough analysis I have ever seen of the teaching of the Quran in comparison with the Bible. It is a treasure trove of biblical truth, theological insight, and practical application. Sometimes you have to toot your own horn, I guess. But and then a lot of you know Pastor Dale Witherington. He also wrote this compendium, Understanding Islam in the Light of Christianity, is a vital and valuable resource and will be called upon again and again. If you're a pastor, spiritual leader, governmental leader, business leader, or simply a curious person with a sincere desire to understand the heart of both Islam and Christianity, get this book. I have actually 3 versions and a 4th version of the book coming out. The first book on the right there is the compendium. That's that's the full bore, everything you need to know, and maybe some things you don't want to know. Then the middle one is an abridged version. The abridged version is 180,000 words less, has no addendums, no color in it, no charts, maps, or anything like that. And it also doesn't have chapter 14 that the compendium does, which is about Islam in the world, and primarily in Europe, what's going on there. And then there's a smaller book, just an excerpt of 2 chapters from the compendium on Islam's deceptions and lies and the preaching of a false gospel. I have a student edition textbook coming out next month. It's 560 pages approximately. It's a 7x10 format textbook, has almost 350 chapter review questions in it. Dig deeper, opportunities for students to dig deeper into a subject matter in the chapter, full color charts and maps, images, and much more, multiple addendums of additional information and resources, hundreds of references. These are tentative prices in that range. I can also discount it from that, downward from that. Pre-publication, if you order tonight, I'll cut $10 off the price. So that will be an excellent resource for students. I would say particularly junior or senior high school students and early college and university students. Even if they're not taking a course on it in college, it's a good resource to be able to deal with students on campus. There are Muslim students going to Christian universities, so, they may be there for education, but there's great opportunities to dialogue with them as well, rather than letting your student become proselytized. So, without further ado, I'll entertain any lingering questions that you may have. I will say this, there is a danger for any one of us to look at all of this information and all the truth about Islam and not get mad or angry at Muslims. Okay? They're not the problem. We are. Our leaders are. Our churches are. If you want to get angry at the churches in the community that are spewing out this false gospel and coming alongside Muslims and supporting their efforts to proselytize and transform our communities. The Muslims are just doing what we're allowing them to do.
There's a weekly interfaith meeting. Is that the place to ask tough questions about the Quran?
You can, but my experience and what I've seen from others that do that, you get shut down pretty quick. It depends on the audience, depends on who's running the meeting. Depends how open there is. But most such meetings are pretty one-sided.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Could you tell me in the Quran where it says that the Muslims go to hell after they die and then they...
Yeah, it's, I can't give you the verse right off, but I believe it's in Surah 19 or chapter 19.
That related to anything with their good deeds versus the bad deeds?
Really, no. That's separate. I mean, that's in their Quran, but that's the confusing part, is that, it talks about a gospel of works, good deeds versus bad deeds. Problem is, a Muslim never knows if they do enough good deeds to offset their bad deeds. And according to Islam, there's like 472 sins that a Muslim can commit. But it also says that Allah causes whom He wishes to commit sin. So you could be the most perfect Muslim, but Allah might cause you to sin anyway.
He can pull the rug out from your flesh.
And it says, and in the Quran and in the Islamic law, it talks about the trial of the grave. It's not something you want to go through, although you're dead anyway, so it doesn't matter. But it talks about how every Muslim, when they die, they are sent into the grave. They are stood up in the grave, and 2 militant angels are sent by Allah to beat you all up until you confess that Allah is the one. And if you don't answer satisfactorily, well, then you don't get out of the grave. Well, you're not going to get out of the grave anyway. So, it's estimated by non-Muslim sources that up to 90% of Muslims in the world cannot read the Quran. And according to Sherry Behrens, even Muhammad could not read the Quran if he were literate today, because it's written in a language that didn't exist when he lived, supposedly. And the problem with the Quran, I mean, if we are to compare it just with the New Testament, for example. Okay, in the New Testament, how many associates of Jesus are in there? How many people are mentioned in the New Testament by name? How many circumstances are identified? How many daily life experiences are identified? How much chronology is there from one event to another? How many different places are mentioned? All of this has been verified archaeologically and historically by people who wrote about it at the time it occurred or shortly thereafter. Okay? You go to the Quran as a historical document, it fails miserably. Muhammad is only mentioned 4 times in the book that he supposedly received. Sherry Behrens says Muhammad is not the name of a person. It's the name of a concept. It means follower of God. Okay? Okay? Now, by contrast, Jesus, although the name is used as Isa, and it's not the Jesus of the Bible, but he's mentioned by name 25 times. Moses is mentioned 502. Is this the book of Moses? Why in the Quran are no mention of any of Muhammad's associates, no mention of where he was at the time of the events, no chronology, no continuity?
Well,
you mean that's a divine document? I don't think so.
But don't you get that out of the book, The Life of Muhammad?
Well, that was contrived by somebody else.
I know.
Yeah, and that was apparently written and added to, and even Muslims admit they can't verify most of the hadiths and sunnah or whatever, but it's written by all different people, contributors, and long after this Muhammad supposedly lived.
Don't forget about the books that Aisha, his child bride, destroyed herself, admittedly, according to some of the Abu Bakr al-Siddiq sources, that she destroyed she had his Quran hiding under the bed after he died, and she destroyed many of the books that were...
Well, here's the thing, is, you know, the Muslims claim that no original Bible exists, which is incorrect. They claim that the original Quran exists. No, it doesn't. In fact, the Sunnis say they have the original copy. The Shias say they have the original copy. And then an Arabic historian, 200 years after Muhammad supposedly died, said that the original Quran was lost, but through oral tradition they were able to recreate the original. How do you do that? That's like folk tales.
So Muhammad did not exist at this time.
Here's what Sherry Behrens and other non-Muslim researchers have discovered, okay? Now, according to Islam, Muhammad was the central character, right? The founder of Islam. And according to Arabic history, they started moving out of Saudi Arabia and controlling other regions, Northern Africa and so forth and so on. Other historians that were not Arab the Persians, Christians, Jews, even pagan authors that wrote about historical events during that exact period mention nothing about a guy called Muhammad or a religion called Islam or any of the Arabic battles that supposedly Muhammad fought. How can that possibly be if he was such a dominating figure in Saudi Arabia and nobody else mentioned him or knew about him? Here's the thing. Sherry Behrens went through every date of battle that Muhammad supposedly fought in the Muslims and Arabic Muslims. She discovered that each year was correct, but it was a battle fought by an Arabic Christian. All they did was change the name, change the consequences of the battle to fit the narrative that they wanted to use to control the Arabic people.
What?
Now, that's mind-boggling. But when you read through that, it makes a heck of a lot of sense.
The battles were fought by Arabic Christians.
Yeah, for example, there was an Arabic Christian that was in Jerusalem that was basically responsible for governing the church in Jerusalem and its environs. Okay? He was a firm believer in the second coming of Christ. Okay? He believed that Christ's return was imminent. So he was in the process of building a road from Egypt to Jerusalem so that Egyptian Christians could get to Jerusalem at the time of the second coming. Okay? He was also responsible for building churches and for protecting the Christian environment. Okay? The Dome of the Rock, who Muslims claim is theirs since its construction, was actually a Christian church that was built during that era by this Arab Christian. Okay? I can't give you his name, but anyway.
What time period are you looking at? Late 7th century?
It was actually before that, a little bit before that. It might have been in the 600s, I'm not sure. But anyway, the Dome of the Rock was built around then, and the reason they know it was a Christian center of worship is because I think it was in the 1920s, there was a tremendous earthquake in that region, and the Dome of the Rock was largely destroyed. The Muslims didn't want anybody outside of Islam getting in there, so they bulldozed the rubble as quick as they could. However, 2 photographers got in there before they were able to do that, and I actually got a copy of the book that the one guy published of the photos that were taken. And what it showed was all the Christian mosaics in the floor and on the walls, and there are 12 columns in the Dome of the Rock. Guess what they stand for? The 12 Apostles. Okay? Every nook and cranny had the Christian symbolism and messages and words. Muslims didn't want anybody to see that. Here's another thing, and this is really mind-boggling, and I verified this is a fact. In 1938, when Saudi Arabia came into its oil wealth, one of the first things they did was send bulldozers into Mecca and Medina. Why? They wanted to bulldoze anything that was a remnant of Islamic history. They bulldozed Muhammad's home, his gravesite, the cemeteries, the mosque built by Muhammad. Why did they do that? Because they knew all of that represented a lie. It could not be verified historically. And if they allowed it to stand, everybody would know that Islam was a totally contrived ideology, and Muhammad was a fabrication, as was all the battles and everything else.
So this Arabic Christian fought a battle somewhere. And
he wasn't the only one. He was one of many that his Muhammad's lifestyle and escapades were modeled after.
So subsequently, Islamists turned the...
They took original things that happened and made it Islamic. In fact, that's why that's why the original, well, here's another thing that happened. In Yemen, I forget what year this was, but it was probably 100 years or so ago. They discovered a whole room full of old Qurans. Problem was, they weren't all the same. And the problem was, like I said, they were largely written in Aramaic. In fact, if you've seen Osama Dadek's version of the Quran, he points out there a lot of the words that were originally Aramaic or Hebrew or whatever. But the problem was, like I said, there was no written Arabic language like is used in the Quran today at the time of that all of this was supposedly originating. It was a created language specifically for the Quran. And when it was first created, the Arabic scroll or script has a lot to do with the placement of dots for words. And when they first did it, they missed a lot of the dots, and so it didn't make any sense. That's why if you get a version of the Quran, a lot of it will have interpretations in brackets, or they'll try to explain what the verse said, because without the interpretation, it makes no sense. And the original translators couldn't make any sense out of what they read. So
if Muhammad, here's a question, if Muhammad is a made-up character or concept, why would they ultimately make him into a violent character versus a peaceful one?
Because each characteristic of Muhammad was designed to be a specific intimidation of a people that they were trying to control and dominate. So in order to do that, they saw that the Christian Bible was the guiding force for Christians. The Torah was the guiding control for Jews. And of course, among the pagans, there was a whole mishmash. So early Arabic warlords realized that once they started moving out of Saudi Arabia and conquering other regions, that they needed some kind of ideology in context that could compete with these other ideologies that were at least controlling people in thought and their spiritual life.
Jihad.
So the more domineering they could make this guy, Muhammad, and the more controlling, the greater power they had over the people. I mean, if you read the history of Islam, the true history of Islam, and how they moved out of Saudi Arabia and they moved into India and just took over Hindus it was nothing but sheer force and violence. And then in order to keep them under control, they showed that this was going to be the case if you tried to leave. So, this is, yes?
Was adopting the symbology of Ishtar worship part of the program of co-opting another faith's symbols so that when they see it on the field of battle, they're actually intimidated, seeing their own symbology attacking them, using the crest?
Yeah, and the same with the Quran and Islam. If you look and you study the sources of it, it has a little bit of Christianity, has a little bit of Judaism, has a lot of paganism, and it all comes together